Judge Clarence Thomas mocks Jasmine Crockett's legal skills on the record, smirking like the room belongs to him and daring her to break. But Crockett doesn't blink. She leans forward, then calmly opens her binder, not to clap back, but to trap him inside his own standards. In seconds, Thomas's smirk vanishes. The chamber drops into stunned silence, and what started as a mockery ends with Thomas facing public scrutiny he can't control. It started with a chuckle, but not a friendly one, the kind that's quiet on purpose. Then Clarence Thomas looked straight at Jasmine Crockett like she was a student who walked in unprepared. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, dragging the title out like it was a joke he didn't bother to explain. "You call yourself a lawyer." He paused again, slow and heavy, letting that word lawyer hang in the air like an accusation. "Yet I wonder, do you even grasp the foundations of constitutional law?" It wasn't a question. It was a dare. He wasn't testing her knowledge. He was testing her nerve. Then Thomas leaned forward, elbows barely touching the desk, and his voice got softer, more dangerous. "The law isn't a game for speeches," he added, almost conversational. "It's for people who understand it." Crockett didn't blink. No big inhale, no nervous laugh, no scramble through papers. She looked at him the way a real trial lawyer looks at a witness who thinks they're untouchable, calm, steady, like she's already mapped the whole path from question to consequence. Her hands moved once, slow and controlled. She reached for her legal pad, not in a dramatic way, just like someone doing their job. And instead of firing back, she wrote a single line across the page. One line. Deliberate. The silence stretched longer than people expected. Thomas had clearly assumed she would jump in fast, try to defend herself, try to prove she belonged. Instead, Crockett stayed still. No raised voice, no rushed explanation, just steady breathing and direct eye contact. Thomas tried to take advantage of that quiet. He tilted his head and switched tactics, dropping into professor mode. "Let's keep it simple," he said. "Define strict scrutiny for the record." The way he said it made it sound like a pop quiz, like he expected her to stumble over a textbook phrase. A few people in the gallery shifted forward in their seats. This was the setup. If she hesitated, even for a second, he would own the moment. If she overexplained, he'd cut her off and call it rambling. But Crockett didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached down and slid a thick binder closer to her, the colored tabs visible from across the table. That small movement changed the energy in the room. She lifted her eyes to the chair and spoke calmly, professionally, like she was already in court. "Mr. Chair, I'd like to enter an exhibit into the record and request permission to complete my response without interruption." No attitude, no sarcasm, just procedure. Thomas smiled again, slow and confident. He glanced at the binder like it was a prop from a bad TV drama. "Go ahead," he said, waving a hand slightly. "Let's see it." The tone was dismissive, like he was humoring her. Like he believed whatever she pulled out would be more performance than substance. He leaned back in his chair, settling in, convinced he was still in control of the pace, the optics, the room. Crockett didn't raise her voice, but the temperature in the room still climbed. She straightened the binder, locked eyes with Thomas, and said, slow and deliberate, "Justice Thomas, I'm not here to perform for you. I'm here to put facts on the record." He tried to jump in, murmuring another dismissive, but she didn't stop. "You questioned whether I understand the foundations of the Constitution," she continued, sharper now. "So let's start with the foundations you claim to protect." She leaned forward slightly. "Do you agree the legitimacy of the Supreme Court depends on public trust?" Thomas opened his mouth to pivot into a lecture, but she cut clean through it. "Respectfully, this is not a speech question. It's yes or no." The room stiffened. He hesitated, then said it. "Yes." Crockett didn't smile. "Good," she replied, almost cold. "Because that trust is not automatic. It's earned, and it can be lost. She didn't let the moment breathe. She pressed harder. Do you agree judges must avoid even the appearance of impropriety? Thomas shifted in his seat and tried to soften it with legal fog, but Crockett snapped it back into focus. Don't hide behind language, she said. The public doesn't get to rewrite the rules in secret. Neither do you. Yes or no? The word landed like a hammer. When he finally answered, slower this time, she nodded once and turned another tab. Last one, she said. Do you agree disclosure rules exist for a reason? He paused longer now, eyes narrowing, jaw tightening. Crockett didn't blink. Because if the answer is yes, she added, then mocking my legal skills while sitting on undisclosed privileges isn't authority. It's hypocrisy. He answered, clipped and controlled. Yes. And that's when the room felt it. The chuckle was gone. The smirk was gone. In its place was something tighter, more careful. Crockett leaned forward like she was stepping back into a courtroom, not a hearing room. She didn't rush, didn't gesture big, didn't look around for approval. She simply pulled the binder closer, flipped to a tab marked with a clean label, and rested her finger on a highlighted block of text like it was a loaded point she'd been waiting to make. Justice Thomas, she said, steady and plain. You questioned whether I understand foundations. I'm asking whether the court still respects them. Then she paused, just long enough for the room to realize this wasn't a clapback. This was a record being built, line by line, with no theatrics to hide behind. I've defended the Constitution in real courtrooms, she continued, keeping it tight. Not in theory, not in speeches, in cases where somebody's freedom and future were on the line. She didn't give a long biography, just enough to establish that she wasn't a tourist in the law. Then she slid a single page out of the binder and held it at an angle toward the dais. Exhibit A, she said. Ethics guidance and disclosure language, highlighted, because I don't want anybody claiming they missed it. The yellow markings were impossible to ignore, clean and deliberate, like a prosecutor prepping a jury. This is what the public thinks the standard is, she added. Not because they're emotional, but because this is what the rule says it's supposed to be. Thomas shifted like he wanted to interrupt, but Crockett didn't open the door for it. She kept her voice level and her pace controlled, the way you do when you know the other side is waiting for you to get loud. Now here's Exhibit B, she said, flipping one tab forward and sliding out a second sheet, this one formatted like a simple table. It had columns, dates, short notes. Reported, unreported, amended. Nothing flashy, just tidy and damning in the way clean paperwork can be. This is a timeline, she said. Public reporting, public filings, and public corrections. If the court is asking Americans to trust it, then the timeline can't be messy. It can't be unclear, and it can't be treated like it's optional. She tapped one line with her pen, not stabbing it, just touching it like a pin on a map. Because when regular people make a mistake on paperwork, they don't get to laugh it off. She didn't stop there. Crockett turned to the next tab with a quiet snap and pulled a third page. Exhibit C, she said, and this one was even simpler. Short bullet points, clean spacing, the kind of list that makes it hard to hide. Recusal standards, she said. Not vibes, not politics, standards. She looked up again, and her eyes didn't soften. You told me the law isn't for theatrics, she said, voice sharpened but still controlled. So let's not do theatrics. Let's do standards. Then, without raising her volume, she pressed the blade in deeper. If you expect a freshman member of Congress to know the doctrine on command, then the country gets to expect a justice to respect the guardrails without being dragged there. Then Crockett set the pages down in front of her in a neat stack, squared the binder, and kept her eyes on Thomas. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean back for effect. She leaned in just enough to make the room feel smaller. Her hands rested on the edge of the table, steady, controlled, and her eyes stayed locked on Thomas like she wasn't talking to a symbol, but to a man who had just crossed a line. You questioned my legal skills, she said, slow and clear. But what you're really doing is testing whether this institution still respects the people it claims to serve. The air tightened. You could feel everyone waiting for the swing. She didn't rush it. She let the weight of that sentence settle, then delivered the one that changed everything. The Constitution is not a shield for the powerful to mock the powerless. It landed hard, not because it was loud, but because it was clean and final. Like a verdict read into the record. Thomas moved immediately, trying to regain control. That's not relevant to the matter before us, he said, voice sharp now, the smirk already fading. We're here to discuss legal frameworks, not... Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't interrupt emotionally. She cut in with precision. It is relevant, she said, because accountability is a legal framework. Public trust is a legal framework. And when a justice uses his position to belittle instead of uphold standards, that's not opinion. That's impact. Her tone never wavered, but it carried more pressure than shouting ever could. She stepped even closer to the core of it. If you demand mastery from the people below you, she said, eyes steady, why shouldn't the country demand integrity from the people above them? That line hit the room like a shockwave. A few people actually leaned back, like they'd been physically pushed. Thomas opened his mouth to respond, then stopped himself. His jaw tightened. The confident posture he started with was gone. The chuckle was gone. The smirk that had fueled the entire exchange was completely erased. Then Crockett reached for the binder. One clean motion. No rush, no drama. She closed it. The snap of the cover echoed louder than any gavel. It wasn't just the end of her statement. It was the end of the power dynamic Thomas had tried to create. She sat back, composed, hands folded, eyes forward. Thomas stared down at the desk in front of him for a moment before looking up again, his face flat, forced into neutrality. For a moment after the binder snapped shut, the room didn't know what to do with itself. Thomas shifted in his chair, adjusting the robe on his shoulders like it suddenly weighed more than it had a few minutes earlier. He sat straighter, then leaned back again, searching for the posture that used to work. The easy confidence was gone. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was restraint. Forced, tight restraint. His face settled into something neutral on the surface, but anyone watching closely could see the discomfort underneath it, the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers pressed harder against the edge of the desk than necessary. People in the gallery weren't reacting like they usually do after a sharp exchange. There was no chatter, no nervous laughter. Instead, there was that heavy quiet that comes when everyone realizes they just watched something shift. A committee member cleared their throat and tried to move things along, throwing Thomas a soft lifeline. Justice Thomas, would you like to respond or clarify your earlier remarks? The tone was gentle, almost protective, like someone offering him a way out without more damage. Crockett didn't jump in. She didn't argue for airtime. She simply turned slightly toward the microphone and said, calm and firm, I'll stand on the record. That was it. No follow-up, no debate. Just a statement that she didn't need to chase noise or defend what had already landed. In the gallery, a law professor leaned toward the person sitting next to them and whispered, barely audible but sharp enough to travel, that's how you cross-examine power. A few heads turned. Not toward Crockett. Toward Thomas, because the focus had shifted. He wasn't the authority figure setting the tone anymore. He was the one being measured. Thomas tried to pull the room back to him. He gave a small, controlled laugh, the kind that used to reset the mood. Well, he said, adjusting his glasses, I suppose we've all had our moment of enthusiasm. He waited for the reaction. It didn't come. No chuckles, no supportive murmurs. Just silence. He cleared his throat and added another line about staying on schedule. Still nothing. The hearing room exhaled, but the internet didn't. 3 minutes after Crockett closed that binder, the first clip hit social media. It wasn't even polished yet, just a raw phone capture with shaky framing and blown-out audio, but the caption did all the work. Justice mocks her, she shuts him down in one line. Within seconds, the comments stacked up faster than the video could buffer. People weren't debating policy. They were reacting to posture, tone, power. The story was already forming. Bully versus composure. Robe versus record. 11 minutes later, a second clip took over the feed. This one looped the exact moment the binder snapped shut. Over and over. That sharp sound became the beat of the moment. Someone added subtitles. Someone else added slow motion. Another creator zoomed in on Thomas's face as the smirk disappeared. The loop turned into a visual punchline. Not funny in a joke way. Funny in that uncomfortable, you underestimated the wrong person way. The comments weren't long essays. They were short and brutal. That sound was louder than a gavel. She ended it without yelling. Teach this in law school. 45 minutes in, the tone shifted again. Legal creators and former prosecutors started breaking it down frame by frame. They weren't praising her emotion. They were praising the structure. She laid foundation. She locked him into admissions. Then she introduced exhibits. Then she delivered the closing line. It stopped being just a viral moment and turned into a masterclass clip. Students stitched the video with side-by-side annotations, arrows, highlights, pauses where people pointed and said, "This is where it flipped." The narrative wasn't random anymore. It was method. By nightfall, cable news jumped on it. MSNBC ran the clip with the banner, "Power checked live." CNN split the screen, Crockett on one side, Thomas on the other, running the moment in slow motion. Panels argued about what it meant. One side called it disrespect. The other called it overdue accountability. The more they argued, the more the clip spread. People who hadn't watched a hearing in years were suddenly replaying a Supreme Court justice getting boxed in by a freshman lawmaker. And then the image took over. One still frame. Thomas frozen mid-blink, mouth slightly open, eyes caught between confidence and surprise. That screenshot escaped the clip and became its own thing. It showed up in replies, memes, reaction posts. When you realize you misjudged the room. When the record fights back. It didn't need context anymore. Everyone knew what it meant. The pushback came fast. As the clip kept climbing, the counter-narrative rolled out right on schedule. Commentators started calling Crockett performative. Some said she was playing to the cameras. Others said it was theater, not substance. The tone was predictable. Minimize the impact, blur the facts, turn discipline into drama. They didn't argue what she said. They argued how she said it. And for a few hours, that framing tried to stick. Crockett didn't jump on television. She didn't fire off an angry thread. She didn't chase the noise. Instead, she posted one short statement, clean and controlled, the same way she spoke in the hearing. "If truth looks like performance to you," it read, "that's because you're used to power never being questioned." That was it. No emojis, no insults, no back and forth. Just one line that cut through the fog and landed exactly where it was meant to. Then the second wave hit. Someone pulled a longer clip from the start of the exchange and uploaded it without music, without edits, just the raw sequence. Crockett asking yes or no questions. Thomas trying to dodge. Crockett repeating calmly, respectfully, yes or no. People started watching it again, slower this time. Not for drama, for structure, for intent, for the trap. The comments changed almost instantly. She didn't react emotionally. She built the record. That was a setup from the first question. Legal analysts stitched the two clips together, the foundation questions and the binder moment, and suddenly the whole thing made sense as one clean arc. Admission. Standard. Evidence. Closing line. What some had called clapback energy, started getting relabeled as courtroom strategy. Even people who weren't fans of Crockett admitted it was tight, precise, hard to dismiss. That's when the narrative flipped again. The word loud stopped working. Because she hadn't been loud, she hadn't yelled, she hadn't insulted him. She had controlled the pace, the framing, and the outcome. The more the clip circulated, the clearer it became. This wasn't a viral accident. It was a deliberate takedown built on method, not emotion. By the end of the day, the story had changed. It wasn't about whether Crockett was too aggressive. It was about how a freshman lawmaker outmaneuvered a Supreme Court justice without raising her voice. The counterattack failed not because she argued harder, but because the record kept speaking for itself. And once people saw the full sequence, there was no going back to the old version of the story. If this moment hit you the way it hit millions of others, don't let it end here. Stories like this only matter if they keep moving, if more people see what real accountability looks like when power finally gets questioned on the record. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was this disrespect, or was it long overdue truth? And if you want more real confrontations, more moments where silence speaks louder than shouting, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next showdown, the next hearing, the next moment that changes the conversation. Share this story with someone who needs to see it, because the more people watching, the harder it gets for the truth to be ignored.